Reality fractures at the edges first. If only we'd known what lurked in the spaces between stars, in the vast darkness that separates galaxies. The void doesn't just stare back. It reaches out, it whispers, and eventually, it consumes. My name is Travis Hoskins, and in exactly 6 hours and 17 minutes, I'll either be dead or worse. The black SUV that's been following me since Baltimore will make sure of that. But what NASA's cleanup crews don't understand is that termination won't stop what's coming. Nothing can. I'm typing this in a cheap hotel room that smells of stale cigarettes and broken dreams. The ice machine down the hall makes a sound like dying stars, a rhythmic pulse that reminds me too much of the signal. Everything reminds me of the signal these days. When you've heard the heartbeat of the void, ordinary sounds become pale imitations. The laptop's battery is running low, and I can hear footsteps in the stairwell. They're taking their time, confident in their containment protocols. They don't realize I've already sent copies of this file to every major news outlet and scientific institution. Most will dismiss it as the ravings of a madman. Some might investigate further. A few might even understand what's really happening. For them, I need to start at the beginning. Before Project Kronos, I had a different life. 3 tours with naval intelligence, investigating quantum echoes and timeline divergences under Wedge's guidance. We thought we were at the bleeding edge of human knowledge, documenting temporal anomalies that defied conventional physics. My specialty was pattern recognition in non-linear events. Finding the signal in the noise, as Wedge used to say. That's what caught NASA's attention in '88. The Cold War was winding down, but the military-industrial complex needed new frontiers to justify its existence. When Dr. John Taccone approached me about joining a classified deep space monitoring program, it seemed like a natural progression. "We're not just looking for aliens," he told me during our first meeting. "We're looking for the architecture of reality itself." I remember his office, walls covered in star charts and mathematical formulas that seemed to twist in on themselves. Taccone had a way of looking through you, as if he was seeing all possible versions of a person simultaneously. I later learned he'd spent time at the Southern Reach facility before it was shut down, studying something he would only refer to as the shimmer. "The universe isn't empty," he said that day, pointing to a map of the Boötes void. "It's porous, and sometimes things slip through the holes." I should have walked away then. Should have gone back to my comfortable job hunting temporal spies and quantum infiltrators. But curiosity has always been my fatal flaw. Within a week, I'd signed enough non-disclosure agreements to fill a library and was being escorted to the unmarked facility in Bethesda that would become my prison for the next 2 decades. The Bethesda facility was a monument to Cold War paranoia disguised as corporate anonymity. 3 stories of brutalist architecture surrounded by carefully maintained hedges and discreet security systems that cost more than small countries' GDPs. The sign out front read Advanced Research Technologies Inc., generic enough to make your eyes slide right past it. Dr. Martin Control met me in the lobby my first day. He had the twitchy demeanor of someone who'd seen too much, too soon. His personnel file, which I wasn't supposed to have access to but did, listed him as former Area X research lead before something happened that got him transferred to Kronos. "The void is hungry," he said instead of hello. "We're just learning how hungry." The real facility was underground, accessible only by a freight elevator that required 3 separate biometric scans. The main control room looked like Mission Control's evil twin, rows of quantum computers and deep space monitoring equipment that officially didn't exist yet. The walls were lined with screens showing different sectors of space, all of them focused on the vast nothingness of the Boötes void. Henry Chen ran the astrophysics division. He'd lost his brother Tony to what the official reports called a containment breach at the Southern Reach facility. The unofficial reports, which I accessed through my old naval intelligence contacts, suggested Tony Chen had walked into a temporal anomaly and emerged speaking in tongues before vanishing completely. Henry never talked about it, but he kept a photo of Tony on his desk, the edges worn from constant handling. "Space isn't empty," Henry told me during my orientation. "It's full of holes, like Swiss cheese, We're just starting to understand what lives in those holes." He showed me the initial scans of the void, a billion light-year bubble of nothing that shouldn't exist. Galaxies cluster together. They form webs. This. He gestured at the void's image. "This is like something took a bite out of the universe." The facility operated in 3 shifts, 24/7. We monitored deep space signals, developed new detection algorithms, and filed reports that disappeared into classified databases. The world above changed. Presidents came and went. Wars started and ended. The Twin Towers fell. But underground, we remained focused on the eternal darkness between stars. My office was on the lowest level, next to the quantum mainframe that processed our deep space data. The walls were covered in spectral analyses and signal patterns. Taccone had given me free rein to pursue any anomalies I detected, no matter how strange. "Reality is broader than we imagine," he'd say during our weekly briefings. "We need to be ready when it notices us." I spent my first year developing new pattern recognition software, teaching our systems to differentiate between normal cosmic background radiation and potentially artificial signals. Control thought I was wasting my time. "The void doesn't use radio waves," he'd mutter. But Taccone supported my work, even as he pursued his own increasingly esoteric research into what he called non-Euclidean signal propagation. The facility became my home. I slept in my office more nights than not, divorced my wife over the phone, missed my son's graduation. The void became my obsession, just like it had for everyone else in the program. We were moths drawn to the darkest flame imaginable. Then came the day everything changed. August 16th, 2004. The day we heard the heartbeat of the void. 10 years to the day after my son Marcus vanished in the Southern Reach Triangle, the void started to pulse. I was running standard signal analysis when Monitor 7 lit up like a Christmas tree. The pattern was unlike anything we'd seen before, 2 distinct beats per second, as regular as a metronome. A cosmic heartbeat echoing from the emptiness. "Impossible," Control muttered, his hands shaking as he reached for the bottle of pills he kept in his lab coat. "The energy requirements, the distance, it's impossible." But the signal continued, mocking our understanding of physics with each steady beat. I remember the exact time, 15:47 Eastern Daylight Time. Henry was the first to notice what made the signal truly bizarre. "It's not degrading," he said, pointing to the wavelength analysis. 700 million light-years of distance, and there's no signal loss, no interference. It's like it's being generated right here in the room. Taccone was eerily calm when we briefed him. He sat in his office, surrounded by his incomprehensible equations, and just nodded. "The barriers are thinning," he said, more to himself than to us. "Just like they did at the Southern Reach. Just like they did when Tony Chen walked through." We worked for 72 hours straight, analysing every aspect of the signal. Control's mental state deteriorated rapidly. He kept muttering about non-Euclidean frequencies and the geometry of emptiness. By the 3rd day, we had to sedate him. He was trying to build something in his lab, a device he claimed would let us hear what's behind the heartbeat. The signal defied every known law of physics. It maintained perfect coherence across impossible distances. It carried more energy than 1,000 galaxies, yet our instruments detected no source. It was like the void itself had developed a pulse. I called Marcus's old number during a break, listening to the disconnection tone like I had every day for 10 years. The signal from the void had the same rhythm as the phone's beeping, 2 beats per second. When I mentioned this to Henry, his face went pale. He pulled out an old recording from the Southern Reach investigation, the last sounds his brother Tony made before vanishing. The same rhythm. "It's all connected," Henry said, spreading papers across his desk. "The void, the Southern Reach, Area X, they're all holes in reality. And something is looking through them. Something is reaching through." His hands were shaking as he showed me his brother's final notes. Tony had drawn the same mathematical patterns that Taccone had on his office walls. Taccone became increasingly obsessed with the signal's mathematical properties. He spent hours in his office, covering the walls with new equations. "It's not just a message," he told me late one night. "It's a key. They're teaching us how to open the door." The DoD wanted to shut us down when they learned about the signal, said it was too dangerous to continue monitoring. But Taccone had political connections, strings were pulled, budgets were increased, and Project Kronos entered its next phase. We didn't just monitor the signal anymore, we studied it, analysed it, let it burrow into our dreams. I should have seen the warning signs, should have noticed how Control's ramblings started making a terrible kind of sense, should have paid attention when Henry started talking about hearing his brother's voice in the static between signal pulses. But we were all too far gone by then. The void had us in its grip, and still, the heartbeat continued. 2 beats per second. Perfect. Eternal. Patient. The years between the signal's discovery and our fatal response were marked by a slow dissolution of everything we thought we understood. Reality began to fray around the edges of our underground facility, like fabric wearing thin from constant use. Control was the first to truly break. I found him one morning in his lab, surrounded by dismantled equipment arranged in precise geometric patterns. He'd used his own blood to draw equations on the walls. "The heartbeat isn't coming from the void," he said, eyes fever bright. "The void is the heartbeat. The universe is just the flesh around it." We had him committed to a private facility in Virginia, one of those places that doesn't officially exist. Before they took him away, he grabbed my arm and whispered, "Ask Taccone about the Black Aurora program. Ask him what really happened to your son." When I confronted Taccone about this, he just smiled that distant smile of his and said, "Some questions are doors better left closed, Travis." Henry threw himself into his work with a frightening intensity. He developed new mathematical models to explain the signal's impossible properties. "It's not just maintaining coherence," he explained during one late-night session. "It's ignoring space itself, like the distance doesn't exist." He showed me his equations. They looked more like occult symbols than mathematics. "Tony understood," he said, referring to his lost brother. "Before he walked through, he said the geometry was wrong, said space was just a consensus reality we'd agreed upon. The things in the void, they never signed that agreement." Taccone encouraged our obsessions. He secured more funding, brought in exotic equipment that hummed in frequencies that made my teeth ache. The facility expanded downward, new levels excavated for projects even I didn't have clearance to know about. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses through half-open doors, strange machines that seemed to bend in impossible ways, researchers staring at screens filled with patterns that hurt to look at. I had my own demons to wrestle. The signal had begun appearing in my dreams, not just its sound but its mathematics. I'd wake up with equations carved into my arms, formulas that made perfect sense until I fully awoke. My ex-wife stopped accepting my calls. The few friends I had left drifted away. The void became my only companion. 2007 brought our first real breakthrough. Henry discovered that the signal contained embedded patterns, not just the regular beats, but subtle variations that suggested a deeper structure. "It's like a language," he said, "but not one meant for human minds." Taccone was ecstatic. He began pushing for an active response protocol. "We need to answer them," he insisted during staff meetings. "They're waiting for us to prove we understand." He spent more and more time in the sub-basements with his mysterious machines. The government changed around us, Bush to Obama. But Project Kronos remained constant. We were too deeply embedded in the military-industrial complex to be affected by surface politics. Besides, we had powerful allies. The Black Aurora program, whatever it was, wanted the signal research to continue. Then came the night Taccone disappeared. His office was found empty, the walls covered in fractal patterns that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. His final note read simply, "The emptiness is alive, and it's so very hungry." They brought in a new project director, but we all knew something had shifted. The void had claimed its first victim from our team. It wouldn't be the last. In 2009, against Henry's increasingly desperate warnings, we received authorization to respond to the signal. None of us knew we were signing humanity's death warrant. The decision to respond came down through channels so classified even I couldn't trace them. The authorization document was stamped with the black aurora symbol, a solar eclipse rendered in negative space. Later, I'd understand the terrible significance of that imagery. We spent 3 months preparing the response. Henry argued against it with increasing desperation. "You don't understand what we're dealing with," he said during one particularly heated meeting. "These aren't aliens sending radio signals. This is something that exists in the spaces where existence isn't supposed to be possible." But the momentum was unstoppable. The military-industrial complex had tasted something beyond human comprehension, and like all empires throughout history, it wanted more. They brought in specialists from other black projects, names I recognized from my naval intelligence days. Dr. Alexander Kane from the Kessler Institute, Professor James Ward, the man who wrote the original Southern Reach protocols. "A simple message," Ward advised, "something that demonstrates basic pattern recognition. Don't reveal too much." He seemed more haunted than I remembered, his hands constantly tracing patterns in the air as he spoke. We settled on hello in Morse code, matching the frequency of the void's pulse. The morning of the transmission, I found Henry in his office, burning his brother's papers. "They're going to answer," he said, not looking up. "And when they do, everything ends." The transmission itself was anticlimactic. A few keystrokes, a surge of power through systems that shouldn't exist, and humanity's greeting went screaming into the void. Kane insisted on using equipment from the Black Aurora program, technology that supposedly could transmit faster than light. "The normal rules don't apply to the void," he explained. "Time moves differently there." We celebrated that night in the facility's cafeteria, government-issue champagne in plastic cups. Kane gave a speech about humanity's next great leap. Ward stayed in the corner, muttering to himself and drawing symbols on his napkin. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the signal stopped. The silence hit like a physical force. For 5 years, that steady pulse had been our constant companion. Its absence felt like a death in the family. The monitoring equipment showed nothing, no degradation, no fade out. The heartbeat simply ceased. The facility erupted into chaos. Henry locked himself in his lab, screaming about probability collapse. Kane disappeared back to whatever shadow agency had spawned him. Ward was found in the bathroom, trying to crack his skull open against the mirror. "They heard us," he kept saying. "They heard us and now they're coming." I called Marcus's number again that night. Instead of the disconnection tone, I heard something that still haunts my dreams. The sound of my son's voice, aged 10 years, reciting mathematical formulas in a language that human tongues weren't meant to speak. The void's silence lasted 5 years. We kept monitoring, of course. The government doesn't abandon billion-dollar projects just because they stop producing results. But something had changed. The facility felt different. Reality seemed thinner somehow, more provisional. Tacone's old office remained sealed, but sometimes we'd hear noises from inside, scratching sounds like something trying to write equations on the walls. The fractals he'd drawn seemed to have spread, infecting neighboring rooms with their impossible geometries. We should have known what the silence meant, should have recognized it as the calm before a cosmic storm. But humans are very good at ignoring uncomfortable truths. Then, 8 months ago, we got our answer. The void's response came during my night shift. I was alone in the monitoring room, reviewing Henry's increasingly disturbed research notes about what he called consensus reality collapse. The equipment activated without warning, every screen, every sensor, every quantum processor suddenly lighting up with activity. The message was clear: goodbye, in perfect Morse code. A message that should have taken 1.4 billion years to reach us had arrived in just over a decade. The implications were staggering. Either our understanding of physics was fundamentally flawed, or something had deliberately bypassed the laws of space and time to reach us. I tried calling Henry, but he wasn't answering. His latest notes had become almost incomprehensible, pages of calculations interspersed with drawings of his brother Tony and snippets of equations from Tacone's walls. The last coherent entry read, "The void isn't expanding. It's remembering what it used to be." Then we saw it happening. The first star disappeared at 3:17 a.m., the exact time the original signal had stopped years ago. Through our quantum-enhanced telescopes, we watched as a point of darkness expanded outward from the center of the Bhuta's void, consuming light and matter at impossible speeds. Dr. Ward appeared in the doorway, his face twisted in a rictus of understanding. "The Black Aurora program," he gasped. "We weren't studying the void, we were teaching it how to reach us." He pulled out a gun, standard government issue, and put it in his mouth before I could stop him. The next few hours were chaos. The expansion accelerated exponentially. Entire galaxies winked out of existence faster than light itself could travel. The laws of physics weren't just being broken, they were being systematically dismantled. Henry arrived around dawn, clutching a stack of his brother's old Southern Reach files. "Tony saw this coming," he said, spreading papers across the monitoring station. "The shimmer, the void, they're the same thing. Holes in reality that something old is using to come back through." He showed me transcripts of Tony's final moments before vanishing into the anomaly. "The geometry is wrong because we're inside it. The universe isn't expanding. It's being digested. And now it's noticed that its food is becoming aware." Kane appeared next, flanked by men in black suits. "Protocol Omega is now in effect," he announced. "All Kronos data is to be purged. All personnel are to be debriefed and—" He paused, sharing a look with his escorts that made my skin crawl. "Processed." I knew what that meant. Had seen too many processed assets during my naval intelligence days. Henry must have known too, because he started laughing, a horrible, broken sound. "You still think you can contain this?" he asked Kane. "The void isn't just expanding. It's converting space itself back into whatever existed before space was a thing, before light and dark, before time." The cleanup crews arrived within hours. I watched through my office window as teams of blank-faced men began systematically destroying decades of research. Henry barricaded himself in his lab. The last thing I heard him say through the door, "Tony was right. Reality is just a thin film grown across the surface of something much older. And now that film is dissolving." I managed to escape during the initial confusion, but not before downloading key files to a quantum-encrypted drive. The same drive I'm using now to record this testimony. The first public signs appeared 3 months after my escape. Reports of astronomical anomalies that the media couldn't quite explain away. Stars vanishing from telescopes. Strange geometrical patterns in deep space photographs that made observers report headaches and nosebleeds. I went underground, using old naval intelligence contacts to stay ahead of Kane's cleanup teams. Henry wasn't so lucky. They found him in a motel outside Frederick, surrounded by papers covered in the same fractal patterns from Tacone's walls. The official report called it suicide. The unofficial report, which I accessed through channels that cost me the last of my favors, described finding him partially phased through the floor, still attempting to write equations with what remained of his hands. Control escaped from his facility in Virginia. Security footage showed him walking through solid walls, reciting mathematical proofs in backwards Latin. They found his body 3 days later, or what was left of it. The autopsy revealed impossibilities, organs arranged in non-Euclidean configurations, a brain whose mass couldn't be measured because it seemed to exist in multiple spatial dimensions simultaneously. The government's response was predictable. Total information control. They flooded media channels with distractions, political scandals, celebrity dramas, anything to keep people from looking up at the increasingly strange sky. But you can't hide the truth forever, not when reality itself is coming undone. I made contact with Dr. Ward's widow, hoping to learn more about the Black Aurora program. She shared his personal files, hidden behind a wall in their basement. What I found confirmed my worst fears. The program wasn't just studying anomalies, it was actively trying to communicate with whatever existed in the spaces between realities. Project Kronos was never about finding alien life, Ward's notes explained. It was about making contact with the entities that existed before our universe formed. the ones that have been waiting in the void, watching us develop the mathematics to understand them. The same entities that took Tony Chen, that drove Tacony mad, that showed control the true shape of space. The expansion of the void continued to accelerate. Professional astronomers were silenced or discredited, but amateur skygazers noticed. Entire sections of the night sky going dark, constellations deforming in ways that violated geometric logic, strange lights that moved in patterns that hurt to look at. I found myself understanding more of Henry's final equations, the mathematics of dissolution, the calculus of reality's end. Sometimes I wake up speaking in tongues, reciting formulas that make perfect sense until I try to write them down. The void isn't just consuming space, it's rewriting the rules that make space possible. Kane's teams got closer with each passing day. They found my safe house in Denver, my backup location in Seattle. I stayed ahead of them, but only barely. They weren't just hunting me, they were eliminating everyone connected to Project Kronos, trying to contain the truth even as the sky itself betrayed their efforts. The last message from my son's old phone number came yesterday. No disconnection tone this time, just a series of numbers that matched the frequency of the void's original heartbeat, followed by Tony Chen's voice reciting the final line from Tacone's notes. The emptiness is alive, and it's coming home. They're in the hallway now. I can hear them methodically checking each room, their footsteps echoing with that same terrible rhythm, 2 beats per second. The laptop's screen flickers with patterns that remind me of Tacone's fractals. Reality feels tissue thin here in this cheap motel room, like I could punch through it if I just knew where to push. The void will reach our galaxy in approximately 72 hours. The calculations are perfect. Henry's final gift to humanity, written in his own blood on his motel room walls. The cleanup crews can't stop it. The Black Aurora program can't contain it. We opened a door that was never meant to be opened, and now something impossibly old is walking through. Kane's team got Henry's brother Tony's body last week, not from the Southern Reach site where he vanished, but from a basement lab in Maryland where he had apparently been trying to materialize for the past decade. The autopsy reports describe a corpse that aged backwards, its DNA rewritten into patterns that matched the void's signal. In his pocket, they found a note written in Tacone's handwriting, dated tomorrow. The geometry of flesh is just as provisional as the geometry of space. I understand now why Marcus disappeared all those years ago. Children see the truth of things sometimes, notice the places where reality doesn't quite line up. The void didn't just send us a signal. It's been reaching through every crack in existence, testing our dimensional walls, looking for ways in. The Southern Reach, Area X, the Black Aurora sites, they're all places where something pushed back against its touches. The thing we thought was empty space was actually an entity so vast that emptiness was the only way our minds could perceive it. The Bota's void wasn't a nothing. It was the eye of something that had been watching us since before we invented watching. And now it's waking up. Control understood at the end. His last coherent statement recorded by his facility's cameras. We're not in space. Space is in us. And now it's being removed. I can hear them at my door now. Kane himself is probably out there, ready to process the last loose end of Project Kronos. But it doesn't matter anymore. The void's message is already spreading. Through internet backchannels, through encrypted quantum networks, through the increasingly unstable fabric of reality itself. The stars are going out. The mathematics of existence is being rewritten. And in the darkness between galaxies, something is uncurling that remembers when darkness was all there was. To whoever finds this, I'm sorry. We thought we were explorers, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. We didn't understand that some boundaries exist for a reason, that some forms of knowledge are actually forms of infection. The door is opening. I can hear Kane's voice, distorted in a way that suggests he's no longer entirely subject to three-dimensional physics. The laptop screen shows my reflection, but my face is arranged in ways that faces shouldn't be able to arrange themselves. In my pocket, my phone vibrates with one last message from Marcus's number. It's an image, a mathematical formula written in a script that predates written language. I understand it perfectly now. It's the equation for unmaking the universe. The void speaks, and in the end, we have no choice but to listen.